Now, when it comes to the risk assessment techniques, you have to remember that there's a large variety of audit subjects that you have to look at. I mean, potentially, right? If we're talking about information systems, you have everything under that's there: the operating systems, the users, the database, the data that's being stored, how the information is transported, how it's stored. I mean, it just goes on and on and on, and I'm just scratching the surface. And it all depends, of course, on the organizations that you're auditing. Now, each of these different areas that we're talking about will have different types of risk, different types of audit risk as well. There are many computerized and non-computerized methods that we go about using to perform risk assessment. And the methods that we use can range from a simple classification of high, medium, and low for the priority of the asset that we're looking for, or the priority of the risk that could occur. You may also find more complex scientific equations that might provide numeric risk ratings as well. They certainly are out there and they exist, but again, the vagueness I realize in communicating these to you is because there's no one size fits all when it comes to these classifications for these objectives that we're talking about. And it's important that you understand the concepts. So again, if you think about it as far as the classification systems, high, medium, and low are ambiguous, and you might have other types of classifications that basically convey the same type of rating scale. And yes, depending on what objects we are or subjects we are auditing, there may be complex equations that help give good numeric risk ratings that are either available by the vendor, available through the sciences of computer information, many different places. So it's just important that you understand that our goal is to understand the methods of performing risk assessment and what some of the outcomes we're expecting from that risk assessment. Now, as an example of a risk assessment approach, you might use a scoring system to be able to prioritize audits based on risk factors. Some of the variables you might consider: well, what's one of the risk factors? How technically complex is the subject that we're auditing? Because, it might be outside my skill set, and we may have to bring other people in, third parties, that could bring in and introduce new risk. We also want to look at the level of control procedures that are in place and the potential loss. What is the actual real loss or financial loss to the organization with that subject that we're trying to audit, that we're looking at to evaluate the risks that could be facing that particular subject, or what we'll later on call an asset that we're trying to protect. Another form of risk assessment is basically judgmental. That means decisions can be made based on your business knowledge, management directives, historical information, or even on business goals. The auditor should consider the level of complexity and detail that is appropriate for the audit as well. Now, risk assessment can be used to determine the areas to be audited, and we again can base that on a lot of information, like number one, do we have limited audit resources? If we do, then certainly, that's where we can determine what areas we are going to be able to do these risk assessments on. We can look at the information obtained from all levels of management, and that can help us in determining, where are the high-risk areas? Again, back to priorities. What should we look at first? Now, how the individual audit is related to the overall organization should also be considered, as well as its linkage to the business plans. Your audit objectives refer to the specific goals that must be accomplished during the audit as a part of the plan. Basically, your goal, the objective, is to audit, let's say, this control. Then that is your goal, and that's what you should finish or accomplish to successfully complete the audit. So you might have an objective to maybe on substantiating that internal controls exist, to minimize business risks, and to make sure that those controls are functioning as required. One of the key elements in planning the audit objective is to translate your basic and wide range objectives into specific audit objectives. How else can we say, that was pretty wide range, say as an example, that you're making sure your internal controls exist to minimize business risks? Well, that's not actually even very specific, right? It's a very wide range objective as far as, the overall number of controls we might be looking at. But our goal is to try to figure out how we can get that into the specific audit objective, which is, are they functioning as required in minimizing business risk? As an auditor, you should have an understanding of how the general objectives can be translated into a specific control objective. Again, if they're looking at that wide-ranging idea, to make sure that we have all these controls working to meet the reduction of risk, well, now I have to say, okay, which control? Look at each one of them and translate the objectives of the audit to what I'm going to use as my objective for this specific control, and knowing that that objective for that specific control leads to the overall objective being accomplished. It is an important process that you have to go through in planning your IS audit. We can look at compliance versus substantive testing in the following way. Compliance testing is you're gathering evidence to basically test to see if the organization is in compliance with a control procedure. Now that's different than substantive testing, where the evidence is used to evaluate the integrity of transactions data or other information. One way of looking at it is if you're doing compliance testing and you find that the control is in compliance, then you should feel pretty confident that you've got your risks at a minimum, at least within the goals of the organization. But if you notice that the control itself is not as compliant, meaning it's got some risks that you don't want, now you got to understand, okay, well, there are some things in here that make this control not as compliant, but did that lack of control affect the actual information? That's where the substantive testing can come in, to look at and evaluate the integrity of the transactions data and other information to see if they've been negatively influenced by the weaknesses found in some other control. So as I said, the compliance test is to determine if controls are being applied in compliance with the manager's policies and procedures. Remember, the goal for us is to understand the objective of the compliance test and of the control being tested. And if I again compare that to substantive tests, where all we're looking at is the integrity of the processing being evaluated rather than the compliance, you can almost see that they can go hand in hand, because it's, even if I have a control that's in compliance, I may still want to test to make sure that the information has maintained its integrity. So wrapping this all up, compliance and substantive testing can work together. Now, if a control is found to be in compliance, that can help reduce the need for the substantive testing, because if it's in compliance, we should have a greater confidence of the integrity of the information. But on the other hand, as I said, if the control shows a weakness, then you can use the substantive test to help reduce the doubts about the accuracy and validity of the information that was being audited.